Thank you. Thanks a lot, Urna. Thanks again for giving me the opportunity to meet you and give this presentation. A week ago, my presentation was about the strategic purchasing. Okay. Today, I'd like to give you a bit bigger picture, a bit whole picture of healthcare financing, with the aim toward universal health coverage. As you know, we work on health insurance and healthcare financing, but our fundamental goal, our final goal, is to achieve universal health coverage with these health financing mechanisms. So I'd like to give you a bit bigger picture about this universal health coverage. Can you share the my PPT? Please share the PPT in Mongolian version. By the way, how cold is it now there? What's the temperature in Ulaanbaatar today?
It's getting warmer, so today it's plus or minus. +5.
-5?
Yes.
Is it minus or plus? Okay. Oh, wow. It's really warm there then. Wow, good. Okay. So my presentation is about this health insurance financing toward universal health coverage. Next, please. Next page, page 2. Yeah, first, where are we? Okay, globally, our goal is to minimize the out-of-pocket payment. Sometimes we call it household direct payments at the point of healthcare utilization. And instead, we want to maximize the role of public financing, public funding. And we call it public prepaid financing. It can be either taxation, government tax, government budget, or social health insurance. Or you can call it mandatory insurance or national health insurance. So we want to increase the role of this public funding like tax and insurance, and minimize the role of direct payment. Because from the experience of low and middle income countries, we know that a big out-of-pocket payment result in catastrophic payment for healthcare, which means that we have to pay a big proportion of our household income to healthcare. So it is called catastrophic payment because the level of payment for healthcare can be catastrophic to our household. And also this type of too big payment for healthcare will result in poverty. In other words, before illness, household was not poor, but as a result of illness, as a result of this catastrophic pay, household become poor. So it is called a impoverishment. And sometimes very poor people, they give up. They give up treatment because the out-of-pocket payment is too big, it is too expensive. And as a result of giving up healthcare, it will result in unmet need. So, and also globally, as Orna mentioned, globally, we try to move toward universal health coverage. And in that progress, we should pay attention not only how many people are covered by health insurance, but also what is the coverage of benefits? What is the benefit packages? Okay, because even if all population is covered, but if benefit package is very limited, then people will suffer. So we pay attention both population coverage and benefit coverage. And also we cannot achieve universal health coverage in a few years. It takes many years to achieve UHC. So in that progress, we should pay attention to the protection of vulnerable people, like poor people, poor household, children, older people. Next page, please, page 3. Page 3, yeah. This is a global trend. So here, out-of-pocket payment as a percentage of health expenditure. And this is a high-income country. So high-income country, they pay relatively low out-of-pocket payment, but upper middle-income country pay more, and low-income country or low-middle-income country, they spend a lot, or the majority of health care expenditure comes from out-of-pocket payment. So you can expect that the financial burden on the household will be very high in low-income countries. Next, please. Page 4. So this is the health expenditure as a percentage of GDP, a bit old, but not very different these days. You can see this is this is the United States, very extreme case. They spend almost like 18% of their GDP on health. So we can say that that's a bit too much, because health is not the only important thing, right? Health are very important, but at the same time, we have many important policy issues in the country. So if you spend like 20% of GDP on health, probably that is a bit of too much expenditure on health. That's the extreme case in US. And this is a high-income country, so-called OECD high-income countries in the world. So on average, they spend 8 to 10% of their GDP on health, on average, right? But more importantly, the composition of health expenditure. If you look at this composition, this dark blue line is a share of tax. And sky blue line is the share of national health insurance or social health insurance. And this dark red is out-of-pocket payment, and just red is a private insurance. So you can see that the majority of these high-income OECD countries, they rely on public funding, like tax or health insurance, rather than private funding, like private insurance and out-of-pocket payment. The exception is the US. But with the exception of US, most high-income countries rely mainly on tax or social health insurance. And you can see that, like a United Kingdom, the majority comes from tax. Same, Sweden, Spain, Norway, New Zealand, Italy, Ireland, Finland, Denmark, Canada, Australia. These are the so-called NHS, National Health Service countries, or there is almost no role of national health insurance, but it mainly rely on tax. Whereas Some other countries like Belgium, Chile, Czech Republic, Estonia, France, Germany, Hungary, like Israel, Japan, Korea, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Poland, Slovenia. These countries rely mainly on social health insurance. So again, most countries, most high-income countries rely mainly on tax or social health insurance. With the exception of US, they rely a lot on private insurance. Next page, please. Page 5. Yeah, in contrast, this is the situation in Asia. Okay. In Asia, you can see that many low-income countries, they rely a lot on this out-of-pocket payment, this purple line. So Vietnam, Singapore, Philippines, Nepal, Myanmar, Mongolia, these purple, like India, Indonesia, Cambodia, Bangladesh, they rely heavily on private out-of-pocket payment. And in Asian countries, the role of private insurance is relatively small because the market for private insurance is limited in many parts of Asia. So you can see that the majority of health expenditure in Asia comes from out-of-pocket payment. The exception is Japan, because Japan and Korea is a health insurance, national health insurance countries, China as well. So China, Japan, Korea are so-called national health insurance countries. Next, please. Page 6, yep. So as you see, you saw that low and middle income countries relied a lot on out-of-pocket payment for healthcare. In addition to this big financial burden from out-of-pocket payment, many low and middle income countries faced low economic growth. Because global economy, the competition is very severe. So economic growth is very, tough for many low-income countries. And also related issue is that huge informal sector. Okay? Many people don't have jobs, but even when they have jobs, the kind of job is very unstable, so-called informal sector. And furthermore, economic development does not necessarily mean high employment. Why? Like 30 years ago, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, for example, in Korea, the majority of manufacturing, they had manufacturing facility in Korea. About 30 years ago, Hyundai Automobile, Samsung Electronics, they all had their manufacturing plant in Korea. But these days, what's going on? Probably Hyundai Automobile produce about more than half of their cars outside of Korea. They have a big plants in Europe, India, America, Brazil. So, and another factor is that there's an increasing role of service sector. Like these days, like YouTube, there are many YouTubers. There are a lot of freelancers and part-time workers. So these days, even if a country has economic development, it is possible that the formal sector employment stays the same. So that means that if we rely only on premium contribution, like a former original type of health insurance system, if you rely only on premium contribution and cross subsidy from the formal sector to the informal sector, may not work. Okay, because formal sector stays small and informal sector stays big. In that case, cross subsidy from the formal sector, small formal sector to the big informal sector is not sustainable. So that is a dilemma. Because in health insurance system, usually formal sector workers pay full contribution. But it is very difficult to collect contribution from the informal sector. So there tend to be some kind of subsidy, help, financial help from the formal sector workers to the informal sector workers. But this type of implicit help from the formal to informal sector workers may not go very smooth these days. And also many low and middle income countries face the performance issues of public hospitals. I think it's a similar case in Mongolia. Do you believe, or do people in Mongolia believe that public hospitals, they work harder than private hospitals? I mean, why? Because that's the same kind of perception in many countries. Productivity of public hospitals is lower than the productivity of private hospitals. Sometimes quality can be different. Of course, we might ask, why? What's the reason for this difference? Okay, it's a complicated issue. Well, public hospitals do not have enough resources, but it's not 100% reason, because we have incentive issues. Last Monday in my lecture, I talked about incentive structures, financial autonomy of public hospitals, because many public hospitals, they do not have correct incentive to work hard. Okay, so we need multiple policy solutions to improve the performance of public hospitals. And also, in a sense, this type of, I mean, we are talking about, Mongolia has a health insurance system, and health insurance system is can be a very effective tool to improve the performance of public hospitals. Because before health insurance, 100% of hospital budget, hospital revenue comes from government budget. But after health insurance is introduced, then public hospitals, they should receive reimbursement or payment from health insurance agency like Higo. So that means if public hospitals do not work hard, they cannot get payment from insurance agency, then they may not be surviving. So that is another very important role of health insurance system. Health insurance not only provides insurance access for the public patients, but also it can be an effective tool, policy tool, to improve the performance of public hospitals by providing incentives for them to work harder. Next slide, please. Page, okay, 7. So it's a financial protection. This is the main purpose of healthcare financing, because but we should be very careful about this commonly used measure, like out-of-pocket payment at the point of service is a commonly used measure for financial protection, correct? However, we should go beyond the average out-of-pocket payment in the country. Let me give a good example, like Malaysia. In Malaysia, let me see whether we have this. Can you go back to slide 5? Slide 5. Yep. Here, Malaysia. Look at this, Malaysia. about half of health expenditure comes from government tax, right? But another half comes from out-of-pocket payment or small portion private insurance. So it doesn't look like very good financial protection in Malaysia. However, the financial protection looks very good in Malaysia. In other words, the catastrophic payment is quite small in Malaysia. Impoverishment due to illness is very low in Malaysia. Why? Why average out-of-pocket payment is relatively high in Malaysia, but financial protection is good? Because in Malaysia, it has a good targeting system. Targeting system means that they have a very good primary healthcare systems in the public sector. That means they have a very good public health centers, especially in rural area, very good quality. And they have very good quality public hospitals as well. So if you go to public health centers, it's free. If you go to public hospitals, it's almost free. So poor people, they are perfectly fine because they are satisfied with the quality of care in public health centers and public hospitals. However, in urban areas, mainly in urban areas, there's some queue. There is a waiting line for public health centers and public hospitals. So many, mainly the better off people and many former sector high-income workers, they go to private hospitals and private practitioners, private physicians for primary care because they do not want to wait, because time is very important for them. So these high out-of-pocket payments, these out-of-pocket payments are mainly paid by those rich people, mainly paid by those who can afford to pay. So we should be careful when we interpret this out-of-pocket payment. When out-of-pocket payment is paid by the better off, by the rich people, there is a little problem in financial protection. Let's go back to the page 7. Page 7. Okay, so that's what I'm saying, that we should be careful when we interpret the average measures. But I just mentioned that another problem in catastrophic pay and impoverishment measure is that if a person is too poor, they cannot use healthcare at all. They give up treatment. In that case, there might be no catastrophic payment. There might be no impoverishment because they cannot use, they give up. They do not use healthcare at all. So another very important measure of financial protection is unmet need. We should also measure the unmet need. But more importantly, why? What is the reason for catastrophic pay or impoverishment? First, the population coverage. If public funding covers only a small proportion of population, then uncovered population, they suffer from catastrophic pay or impoverishment. Or even if population coverage is high, but if the benefit or cost coverage is low, then financial protection problem occurs. And also quality is very important. As I mentioned, in the case of Malaysia, the public hospitals and public health centers, they provide a reasonably good quality of care and people are more or less happy. They are willing to use those public sector providers. But if people do not trust public providers like India, then they do not use public hospitals. Rather, they go to private providers and they pay out of pocket. So quality of care provided by public hospitals is a very important determinants of this financial protection. Next page, please, page 8. So this is a very famous kind of box determining universal health coverage. There are multiple dimensions. First, breadth. How many people are covered? Is a 70, 90, or 100% of population is covered? That is this one direction, one dimension. But another dimension is that which benefits are covered, because mandatory health insurance cannot cover every services, correct? So it should be able to cover all medically necessary services. So service coverage benefit package is another important dimension of this universal coverage. And also another dimension is the cost sharing, because even when we have health or public insurance system, usually we require some degree of co-payment or cost sharing, correct? Same in Mongolia, because we are worried that if there is no cost sharing, then there might be an overutilization. So that's why that we impose some degree of cost sharing. But if the co-payment is too high, it has a negative impact on the access to healthcare and universal health coverage. So ideal kind of universal health coverage means that we cover everybody. And also we cover all medically necessary services, but probably, we cannot make the co-payment to zero. Probably we set the co-payment level at a reasonable level, such that people do not overutilize healthcare. Next page, please. Next. So these are the kind of a global, like a Western Pacific Regional Office Asian figure of the catastrophic pay expenditure impoverishment. Let me skip. Next. It's a page 10. Page 10 is similar statistics on catastrophic expenditure and impoverishment in the Southeast Asian Regional Office of WHO, such as like Bangladesh, India. So you can imagine that catastrophic expenditure, like a 14% of households, they experience catastrophic payment, when the catastrophic payment is defined as the 10% of households' income is spent on medical care. Okay? And impoverishment due to high out-of-pocket payment in Bangladesh, about 4.5% of the household become poor as a result of catastrophic healthcare expenditure, when the poverty line is defined as 1.9 per day. So it depends on how to define the poverty line. Next page, please. Page 11. So this is increase in catastrophic expenditure trend for the 10 years from 2000 to 2010 globally. As this is the increase in household spending more than 25% of their income on health, and this is the increase in the number of households. I mean, increase in households spending more than 10% of their income. So you can see globally, there's large increase in the household spending experiencing catastrophic health expenditure. But compared to other regions, Asia region, a larger percentage of households are experiencing this increase in catastrophic health expenditure. Next, please. So this is a paper that I wrote on Korea, because Korea, to improve the financial protection, government expanded the benefit package. Namely, government reduced the copayment for cancer patients. So I assessed the impact of this policy change on the catastrophic health expenditure in the case of Korea. Next, please. So page 13. So I explained that our goal is to maximize the public funding, either in tax or in premium contribution, and minimize the out-of-pocket payment. Then where the money comes from? This is an issue of financial resource generation, because we need money. We need public money. Okay? So previous, in the case of Europe, high-income countries in Europe, they rely either on tax or social insurance in history. However, recent trend, like a globally recent trend, is that it does not really matter whether it's tax or social insurance. Our goal is just to combine either contribution or government tax in a big pool, in a big fund, in a big pool of funding, and use them effectively to purchase services. So like the case in Mongolia, currently there's a big government subsidy for the poor and vulnerable population in Mongolia. In other words, the vulnerable people in Mongolia, they do not pay the full premium contribution, rather government pays for them. So actually that is, in terms of its monetary origin, it's a tax, it's a government budget. So government budget is combined with premium contribution made by formal sector workers, correct? So Mongolia is already adopting this approach. Okay? So in the case of Asian countries, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, they mainly rely on premium contribution, but still government pays subsidy for the poor and vulnerable population in these countries. And in some countries, like Ghana in Africa, they add some portion of consumption tax and put them into healthcare funding. Okay, so like when you buy food, when you buy something, you pay so-called consumption tax. It's like a value-added tax. But Ghanaian government allocate some portion of this consumption tax to health insurance system. Or some countries like France and Taiwan, they charge health insurance premium not only on wage, but also on other non-wage income. Do you know what I'm saying? So in Mongolia, formal sector workers, like workers, staff in Higo, you pay health insurance contribution as a proportion of your income, salary. However, France, Taiwan, there is an additional health insurance premium charged on other types of income, like investment income. When you invest in stocks or when you put your money in the bank account, you get sometimes profit or interest, and government put or a health insurance charge on that type of non-wage income. Actually, Korea have a very similar system. But in Korea, there's a ceiling such that if your non-wage income is above a certain threshold, then you should pay health insurance contribution on that amount of non-wage income. So basically, when health insurance is first introduced, the concept is that health insurance is charged on wage, because at that time, like 100 some years ago in Germany, at that time, wage or salary is the main income, maybe only income for the majority of workers. But over the years, there are diversified form of income. Some people get income from investment, get additional income from renting houses. So basically, social health insurance or national health insurance, you should pay based on your capacity to pay. So in the long run, in many high-income countries, they target all types of income. It can be wage income, it can be non-wage income, all types of income for the contribution of health insurance, because it's a public money, public program. And other countries in Asia, like India, China, Thailand, Pakistan, especially like Thailand, for the informal sector people, they don't pay any contribution. Government fully subsidized. Government fully pays the contribution for the informal sector. Okay. And recently there is a big program in India. As you know, India is one of the largest country in India, I mean, in the world. So like India, they call it PMJ, Prime Minister's Plan, something like that. And similarly in Pakistan, Prime Minister's National Health Program. It is targeted the poor or vulnerable population. So the government provide full subsidy for the poor in Pakistan. In India is a bigger, more broad, such that in India is a full subsidy for the vulnerable population. Okay, so government gives this money, subsidy premium, to health insurance agency. So that means in India and Pakistan, health insurance agency, they do not collect any contribution from the people, because they only cover the poor and vulnerable population, and government fully subsidize them. And this health insurance agency, their role is not to collect money from people, rather their only role is purchasing, strategic purchasing. Next page, please, page 14. So I already showed a similar picture in the previous slide. This is a combination of funding in Asian countries. So this blue line is a tax money. Okay. This line is a social health insurance, and red line is out-of-pocket payment. Next, please. Page 15. So if you are interested in what is going on in health financing and universal health coverage in Asian countries, you might want to look at this paper. Next, please. Page 16. So, like the case of India and Pakistan, there's no subsidy. I mean, there's no premium collection, because insurance program there only covers the poor and vulnerable population, and those poor and vulnerable population, they cannot afford to pay premium contribution. So government pays a full premium for them. So then, why this type of insurance is introduced rather than, because insurance is called a demand side financing, whereas the conventional way of running public program is government just give more budget to the public hospitals. In other words, say Indian government or Pakistan government may have a choice before they decided to introduce this insurance program for the poor. Option one, they introduce a insurance mechanism, purchasing mechanism. And this insurance agency, as a purchaser, they purchase healthcare from public hospitals. Alternative option, option two can be, okay, government gave more budget, increase the budget, allocation to public hospitals and ask them to treat more and more of those poor and vulnerable population. Which option do you think is better? Well, it can be a complicated issue, but government of India chose the option of, first option. In other words, they create this insurance mechanism and gives this premium subsidy to the insurance agency and ask the insurance agency to be the purchaser of services from public hospitals. Why? From a political perspective, establishing this new agency, new program is more visible. Do you agree? Because if government say, okay, we will allocate more money to the public hospitals, it is not very visible. But if the government says that, wow, this is a new program, new insurance program, and we give money to this insurance program, it's more feasible from a political perspective. So probably politicians prefer this type of new program introduction. Second, purchasing. I keep talking about the role of purchasing because this purchasing can be an effective incentive. This purchasing agency provide good incentive for public hospitals to improve performance. And also, this is a top up. This is public hospitals may like this system because new insurance agency provides more budget, more money to them because there's a trust issue such that even when government says, well, we will allocate more money to public hospitals, it may not be really implemented. But if there's a new program, it is more likely that this program will continue. So probably public hospitals prefer this type of new program, new insurance program, new purchasing program. As I mentioned, political attractiveness, this India and Pakistan, the prime minister used this new program as a brand program of his politics, and also as a purchasing. So it's like a more market-friendly system. This purchasing is expected to provide more incentive for public hospitals. So this is a so-called political economy of health financing. Next page, page 17. So this is the paper on social insurance system in Mongolia. The next page, please. Page 18. So, but it's very important to understand the role of fiscal space. Because, of course, when we talk about revenues and financial resource generation, many people think more premium is the only thing for the resource generation, for healthcare financing. However, there are multiple sources of resource generation, resource mobilization. First one, contribution based. As I just mentioned, if contribution is charged only on wage, so in that time, wage is called a contribution base. So when we expand the contribution base, we can collect more premiums. Like if health insurance contribution is charged not only on wage, but also on financial income, rental income, then HIGO can have more contribution income. So expanding the contribution base is one important option for more resource generation, more fiscal space. At the same time, if we improve efficiency of the system, such as the rational use of drugs and provide a payment system, that means that we reduce the waste, and we can use these savings as an additional income to the system. So efficiency gain is very important. And we can ask the government to pay more attention on health. In other words, increase the priority, government priority on the health sector. So government can provide more budget to the health insurance system. So this can be an important source of resource generation for the health sector. Of course, as you know, sin tax is another important measure. Okay, but you know, I'm a strong supporter of sin tax. But sin tax, what is the main purpose of sin tax? Like a tobacco tax or alcohol tax? What is the initial, you know, what is the fundamental goal of this type of sin tax? Is it for resource generation, or is it for health improvement? Right? We know that we first introduced this type of sin tax mainly for reduced consumption of alcohol and tobacco, and improve our health outcomes. So, you know, this type of sin tax can be a help in resource generation, but that is not the major goal. So we should not forget that we introduce sin tax mainly for public health purpose or behavioral change or improve health rather than revenue generation. Next page, please. Page 19. But it's true that the additional revenue from tobacco tax can help strengthen. I mean, page 19. Yeah. Additional revenue from tobacco tax can help the fiscal status of health insurance system, which is the case in the Philippines. Okay, but we should not. You had better not put too much trust on sin tax as a tool for resource generation. As I mentioned, the main goal of this tobacco tax is for health of the population. Next, please, page 20. So, still, population coverage is important, and how to ensure the more people are enrolled in the public sector funding. So we all agree that we need a mandatory public funding. Okay, so this public funding is based on the principle of social solidarity. Correct? This is the main difference between public and private funding. Private funding, there is no solidarity because as in the case of the private insurance premium is based on your risk, not based on your income. So there is no solidarity concept in private insurance, whereas in public insurance, you pay higher contribution premium if you have a higher income. So it is based on the concept of solidarity. And this type of income-based contribution premium is not possible in voluntary financing. In other words, do you pay higher income tax voluntarily? Is income tax voluntary or mandatory? In all countries in the world, mandatory income tax is mandatory, because if it is voluntary, rich people do not want to pay higher income. See? So if we want to adopt this solidarity concept, then that financing mechanism should be mandatory. Otherwise, rich people do not pay higher contribution. But over the years, recently, the role of government subsidy and tax financing increases. In other words, role of contribution from labor income or contribution from wage is diminishing over the years. Why? Because in low-income countries, as I mentioned earlier, informal sector is too big. And the size of the informal sector does not shrink in low-income countries. So if you rely only on wage income, the revenue for health insurance is only limited. Okay? So in low-income countries, government tend to rely more and more on budget support, subsidy, tax money because of this informal sector issues. Whereas in high-income countries, similar, the revenue from the formal labor market decreased, but mainly as a result of population aging. More and people live longer and longer. So that means the number of life years after retirement is getting bigger and bigger in high-income countries. So if high-income countries rely only on working population income, wage, the funding cannot be sustainable. So both low-income countries and high-income countries, they are looking at more and more of the role of the tax money rather than the wage labor market income. Like old people, retired people, maybe they do not work anymore, so they do not have salary, working income, but they have a pension income, so they still spend. And if they purchase something, they pay consumption tax, correct? So even if they don't have any labor income, but they can contribute by tax or consumption tax. So this is kind of a global trend regarding the increasing importance of tax money, government budget, relative to pure contribution based on wage or labor income. Page 21, please. Page 21. So as you all agree that premium collection from the informal sector is a big challenge. And in many low-income countries, the boundary between the informal sector and poor people is not very clear, okay? So because very vulnerable people, informal sector workers, when they get a job, they are not poor, but when they lose job, they become poor. So boundary between these two segments of population is not very clear in most low-income countries. And like Mongolia, I mean, there are still many nomads people in the rural area, and the cost of collecting premium from these nomad people can be very high. So it's very difficult to collect premium from the informal sector, and even if you collect premium from the informal sector, the amount of premium you can collect tend to be very small. So an exception is Japan and Korea, because Japan and Korea, insurance agency charges insurance premium from the informal sector, not lump sum contribution, but still the contribution payment of the informal sector, or we call it self-employed, it depends on the income. So government adopts a very complicated assessment tool to assess the capacity to pay of the self-employed, and they charge health insurance contribution depending on the amount of the income of the self-employed. But these are very exceptional, and most other countries in the world, they charge a lump sum, fixed amount of contribution for the self-employed, for the informal sector, because it's very difficult to assess the income. So next, page 22, please. So page 22. So in most countries, they combine this insurance and taxation to cover the informal sector. So there's a full subsidy for the poor. Poor people cannot pay contributions. So full subsidy by the government for the poor. And formal sector people, they pay full contribution, but it's always good to have a dependence coverage such that the family members of the formal sector workers, they are also covered by health insurance. And then informal sector coverage, you can have some government subsidy. It can be in the case of Thailand, government provides full subsidy for the informal sector. In the case of Japan, they pay some amount, not full subsidy, but some subsidy for the informal sector. Alternatively, well, you can have a tax funding subsidy for primary care. In other words, like as in the case of Mongolia, in theory, access to primary care should be guaranteed. Okay, it's free of charge, but health insurance tend to cover a more advanced level of care. But there's a global consensus. There's a global consensus that for the informal sector, they have a limited capacity to pay. So there should be some degree of subsidy for this self-employed or informal sector. Okay? That means that pure contribution premium, pure contribution does not work for these informal sector people. Okay, so it can be a full subsidy like Thailand, or it can be a partial subsidy like Japan and China. So in that case, the Ministry of Finance position is very important because the Ministry of Finance, they determine the government funding. Next, please. Page 23. Page 23. Yeah, so this is a case of Ethiopia. And Ethiopia shows that this is a kind of voluntary, so-called community-based health insurance system for the self-employed, for the farmers, but it faces a lot of challenges, okay? Because it is voluntary, it is not mandatory. So whenever it's a mandatory whenever it is a voluntary enrollment, there are some issues like adverse selection. Adverse selection means that only the unhealthy, only those who need medical care, they are more likely to enroll in insurance because they have a higher need for healthcare. So this type of adverse selection becomes very prevalent in the voluntary insurance system. Next page, please, 24. Page 24. So, So another important decision making for healthcare financing is how to pool the resources, because it can be a single fund or multiple fund. What's the case in Mongolia? Mongolia, you have a single pool, luckily, because there's a global consensus that one single pool is more efficient than the multiple pools. So in terms of efficiency, if you have a big pool, nationwide pool, it has a better capacity for risk pooling, and administrative cost is lower. And this one single big pool, it can have a greater bargaining power relative to providers, right? I mean, now in Mongolia, you have only one pool. So the only negotiation is between HIGO and hospitals. But if there are multiple insurance systems, then the bargaining power of insurance agency is fragmented compared to healthcare providers. And also in terms of equity, you can guarantee a same benefit package for everybody in the country, so it's more equitable. And at the same time, you can have a nationwide kind of a cross-subsidy system such that rich people can better help the poor and vulnerable if they are in a one single pool. But if there are fragmented multiple pools, then the cross-subsidy from the better off to the poor people may not work very effectively. So that is why these days, single pool is regarded as more efficient and more equitable than multiple pools. And this is the case in Korea, Philippines, Indonesia, Mongolia. It has a one big pool. But of course, this is a bit complicated political issue. So, but this, I just mentioned that one big pool is more efficient and equitable than multiple pools, but it can be a very complicated issue. Like Japan has a long history of political decentralization. Okay? So this is very closely related with political centralization or decentralization. Because in Japan, they don't have a separate insurance agency because for the resident population, local government is the insurance agency, kind of. So because of that, merging all insurance program into one is very difficult. And also like Germany has multiple insurance funds, but same, Germany has a long history of a political decentralization. And also, you should be very careful that equity in service utilization is not automatically guaranteed in the single pool health insurance. In other words, especially like people in rural areas, if people in rural areas, they have more difficulty in accessing healthcare services, we cannot achieve an equity. So equity cannot be automatically guaranteed in the single pool. I mean, it is more likely to have higher equity, but it's not 100% guarantee. In order to have an equity in service utilization, we should make sure that the people in rural area, they also have a good access to healthcare, reasonable quality healthcare in rural areas. That was the case, a lot of evidence in Vietnam and Indonesia. Similar problems in Mongolia, because in many low and middle income countries, healthcare access in rural area is not as good as in urban area. Page 25, next page, please. So in the case of Japan, they have a multiple pools. Probably you already heard, listen to the lectures on Japanese expert a few weeks ago. But Japan has a multiple pools, but luckily they have a uniform statutory benefit coverage, and they have a uniform provider payment system. In other words, they have a multiple pools in terms of resource generation, because premium rate is different in different localities, different insurance fund. But in terms of purchasing, in terms of strategic purchasing, they achieved a high efficiency because benefit packages are same and provider payment systems are same across different insurance pools. And that is the current situation in Japan and Korea. Until the year 2000 we have this kind of system, but in year 2000, we merged all insurance fund into one agency. So in Korea, we have a single pool for both resource generation and strategic purchasing. And also there's a political economy like Thailand. Thailand is a very good, decent universal health coverage system, but they have 3 different funds. One is a health insurance for the civil servants, health insurance for private sector workers, formal sector workers, and health insurance for the remains. I mean, unemployed, poor, and self-employed informal sector. And government tried to merge those insurance funds into one, but civil servants insurance fund and formal sector workers insurance fund, they currently have a more generous insurance benefits. So they are opposed to the merger of insurance funds because they were worried that they may have to pay higher premium if they are merged with this poor and vulnerable people's insurance fund. And also, as I mentioned, in Japan and Germany, they have a multiple pools, but they have a very sophisticated risk adjustment across pools, because this is not a private insurance fund. This is a public insurance fund. So in some fund, especially in rural areas, they have more poor people, more older people. So they're kind of a nationwide risk pooling mechanisms taking into account age and gender of the people enrolled. That is the case in Japan and Germany. Next page, please. So in the year 2000, Korea had a very interesting policy experience of moving from multiple insurance system to a single insurance system, so-called by merging all statutory health insurance fund in Korea. This paper is about political economy and politics associated with this big policy change in Korea. Next, please. Now, it's purchasing. I think I already gave you a lecture on purchasing. So 2 weeks ago, I mean a week ago. So this is like you can view this part as a what is that, good exercise or reminding process of what purchasing is. And a week ago, I mentioned that purchasing is mainly about this benefits package decisions and provider payment. And the strategic purchasing is about the decision about who purchases. So Higo purchases, correct? Which services? That means the benefit package. From which providers is the selective contracting, and for which payment and quality. So payment systems and quality assurance systems, review and assessment systems. So, and the one important policy leverage is that Higo or health insurance agency as a purchaser use a financial leverage, use this funding to discipline providers. Discipline means now you have this big, you manage health insurance system. You manage the healthcare utilization. That means that if health insurance agency does not contract with healthcare providers, their healthcare providers cannot survive. And this type of threat can be a good incentive, good disciplinary mechanism for providers. So that's the key policy tool of strategic purchasing. Then who should be purchasing? I mentioned that they should, in principle, we pursue the separation of purchasing and provision. And usually in most countries, Ministry of Health is a service provider. So that's why we tend to establish a third party, new institutions like Higo, separate from Ministry of Health. So this independent agency specializing in the purchasing. But remember, this is health insurance. So this insurance agency, this purchasing agency should communicate very closely with the Ministry of Health. So I often have a joke that, they should not hate each other, but they may not have to love each other. Okay, because if HIGO and Ministry of Health are too close, then health insurance agency may not be a tough negotiator with public hospitals, right? Because public hospitals are under the Ministry of Health. So that's why I'm saying that purchasing means that I often call optimal difference. There should be some distance, but it should not be too distant. It should not be too close. So that's why I'm calling a optimum level of distance between purchaser and MOH as a provider of services. And I gave a few examples in Pakistan and India. This is a very interesting case, and recently, the India and Pakistan are big country, huge population. So health insurance program there attracts a global attention these days. And in India, this is still an early stage of development, and India is a big country. So there is a central program, but it is implemented by state government, a bit similar to provincial government. And state government, they can choose either between directly running insurance program or contracting out private carriers. So most countries directly run, majority, more than half of the state government, they run the state insurance program. But there are some states who do not have enough capacity of managing this insurance program. They contract out the private carriers. Of course, this private insurance is not really private in a sense. This is a quasi-government private entity, okay, quasi-government private business, but that is not public. So they have this contracting model with private insurance carriers to run a public insurance program. Next, please. Page 28. And page 28, this is the situation in Cambodia. And in the case of Cambodia, I examine the limitations in terms of the strategic purchasing of Cambodian health insurance system. Next page, please, 29. So purchasing and service delivery, and remember, purchasing is an effective policy tool to strengthen service delivery, discipline providers, and improve health system performance. And there is a close relation between financing and quality of care, because if people are not satisfied with the quality of care, people do not want to enroll in health insurance system. Okay? So there should be, we hope there is a virtuous circle such that healthcare financing improve the access to healthcare, and people are qualified, people are satisfied with the quality of care, and population coverage expands. That's the virtuous circle. But in contrast, some countries in Africa, they have a vicious circle because they have a health insurance system, but quality of care by hospitals is very low. So people are not satisfied with the quality of care. They do not appreciate the role of health insurance. So next year they drop out of insurance. So this is kind of vicious circle. And I mentioned last week about the contracting with private providers. And for the contracting with private providers, regulation and quality monitoring and good information system is very important. And I emphasized a lot last week about the importance of fiscal autonomy, right? Fiscal autonomy of especially public hospitals, because purchasing means that you discipline providers, you improve quality of care by providing some incentive mechanisms, by adjusting payment systems, by changing reimbursement systems. When public hospitals do not have fiscal autonomy, you cannot affect public hospitals. Okay, but at the same time, if government provides too much autonomy to public hospitals, what would happen? The public, in that case, public hospital may behave like private hospitals. That is not what we want, correct? So we will give some degree of fiscal autonomy for the purpose of improving performance, but we are not supposed to give 100% autonomy. So again, we need an optimum level of autonomy. And I mentioned last week that we need a good alignment between strategic purchasing rules and the existing public financial management rules and procedures. Because still many countries have a very strict public financial management rules applied to public agencies, public entities. So in that case, autonomy may face a lot of barriers. Next, please. Page 30. This is the case of this public hospital financing, similar challenges in China. So what has been going on in the hospital financing, public hospital financing in China. Next, please. Next, please. So this is about provider payment system, but I learned that you have a separate lecture on provider payment system. So that's why I decided not to go in details of this payment system. But the payment system is very important because we all know that in the healthcare sector, providers are so dominant. Okay. Providers have more information, they determine the quality, they determine the cost. So how to motivate providers to provide healthcare in a cost-effective way? This is the key element of strategic purchase. And there are two dimensions of payment system. One dimension is how to pay. What is the best way, best method of payment? Our goal is we move away from fee-for-service and we move toward a bigger units of payment like capitation, case-based payment, DRG. But another important dimension is how much to pay. Okay, so we should pay more than the cost. So costing is a very important tool. So the costing, in terms of costing, we can estimate the capital cost, operating cost, and we should provide the payment level should be greater than the cost. But how much bigger, how much greater than cost? That's the key. And another issue is like whether we should provide the same payment or different payments to public versus private hospitals. Next, page 32. So 32. So I think many countries, including Mongolia, has a DRG-based system. Some countries face a lot of challenges, like Japan and Korea, compared to other countries, especially when the hospitals are mainly in the private sector. Then moving toward case-based payment face many challenges because private hospitals are against that policy change. So this is about the case studies of the policies toward DRG-based payment system in Japan, Korea, and Thailand. Next page, please. Page 33. So Again, this one, another very important element of purchasing is benefits purchase, benefits payment, benefits coverage package I mentioned last week. In principle, the purchasing means that we purchased continuum of care. I mean, from primary, secondary to tertiary care. Okay. So for this principle of the purchase of continuum of care, we need a good referral system and we need a good primary care. Okay? So, for example, in India and Pakistan, the insurance mechanism targeting the poor and vulnerable in those countries, they only cover the hospital-based care, inpatient-based care. And for the primary care, it is given to public health centers. So there's some tendency that people just bypass the primary care because people do not trust the quality of care in public health centers, and they rather go directly to hospital inpatient care. So they are a bit worried about increased unnecessary hospitalization as a result of this health insurance program targeting only inpatient. Okay. So that's why I'm saying in principle, we had better cover all continuum of care from primary to tertiary care. And also it covers not only services, but also medicines in the benefit package. But still, I mean, as I mentioned last week, we cannot cover every service. So we need some kind of priority setting, and the benefit package had better be explicitly defined and also the process to determine the benefit package or entitlement should be clearly defined and transparent. Unfortunately, in many low and middle income countries, benefit packages are not clearly defined, clearly understood, and the process is not transparent. So last week, I emphasized that there's a two-stage process. In the first stage, there's a scientific evidence. So cost-benefit analysis or cost-effectiveness analysis to produce evidence, good evidence for the decision-making. But at the next stage, evidence is not enough. We need some kind of value judgment, taking into account the own context of the country. So for these social value judgments, we need some, high-level committees, like a tripartite committee, the health insurance councils. But I also suggest that we need some kind of citizens' participation, as in the case of, especially in the British National Health Service Citizens Council. So this is what I already mentioned last week. Next, page 34. This is a very interesting case study about the radiation oncology services in Fiji. Currently, there's no radiation oncology services available in Fiji public health systems. So when the cancer patient need radiation oncology, they go to either Australia, New Zealand, or India. So there's a big policy discussion whether government needs to introduce this radiation oncology. So it's like a service package decisions. So they asked me to do an economic evaluation. So I did a cost-benefit analysis of establishing this radiation oncology. But of course, this is just a first step. At the second step, they need some kind of value judgment through citizen participation. But this is just an economic analysis based on modeling. Okay, so, but again, this is very interesting case study I performed in Fiji with the support of WHO. Next page, please. Page 35. So this is an example of the citizen participation in the benefit package decisions in South Korea. So as I mentioned, this is a very interesting case that of course, this is still ongoing process because compared to economic evaluation, this is more complicated, as you can imagine, more complicated, but still we needed this kind of value judgments by inviting general public in the decision-making process. Of course, the general public, they do not decide, they do not make a final decision, but the result of this deliberation, policy discussion among the selected, chosen people can be a very important input to the final committee, like Health Insurance Council, before they make a good decision. 37, please. Next page, 37. Page 37, yep. Next, please. So this governance is, that I already talked about governance in health insurance system, but overall, our goal is how to ensure the performance and accountability of the healthcare financing agency like HIGO. We need a clearly defined roles and responsibility, and the role relation between insurance agency and government ministry, like Ministry of Health or Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Finance is very important. And we need a transparency, accountability, and participation, as in like a participation and how to make the governing body in insurance agency. But in reality, there are a lot of, I just said here, it's a formal and informal rules of the game, because so this is why context of public policymaking matters in many countries. Okay, because some rules and responsibilities can be written as a law and in the legal document, but there are also informal rule of the game part. So, and also I've seen that there are a lot of conflict and coordination problems among government ministries. And, I know that before HIGO was established, there are some long-term conflicts and some problems of coordination between Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Health and, SSIGO, Social Security Agency of Mongolia. They're blaming each other. But at that time, I strongly recommended that there should be a separate insurance agency, because pension is different from health insurance. That means that managing single agency, managing both pension and health insurance has little benefits, with the exception of collecting premium simultaneously. Because in pension, there's no purchasing mechanism, right? In pension, there's only pension agency and just the public. People get pension money from the agency. Whereas in health, there are three important parties: insurance agency, consumers, and providers. So there's a strong component of purchasing in health insurance, whereas there's no purchasing mechanism in pension. And also pension is a long-term contract, and health insurance is a short-term contract. Each year, we can change insurance contribution rate and benefit package. So the nature is very different nature between pension and health insurance. And that's why in most countries, there tend to be a separate agency of health insurance separate from pension. But there are other aspects of the role of local government, because again, it is related to the issue of decentralization, because when health insurance premium is combined with government tax, in some countries, government tax means a local government tax. Other countries, it can mean central government tax. So it is related with the taxing power of the local government. Okay? So in some countries, local government plays a very important role. Like India, China is a big country. So their state government has a very strong play, even in the funding contribution. Same in Japan. Japan is even a smaller level of government, is an insurance, plays a role of insurance agency. In Indonesia, they had a uniform system, but still they used to have a strong role of local government in the total funding of health insurance system. Whereas in Pakistan, there's little role of Central Ministry of Health. It's called a full devolution. In other words, all the major roles and responsibilities of healthcare system, healthcare funding is given to state government. Okay. So depending on the nature of this political governance mechanism of a given country, healthcare financing can take a different shape in different countries. Next, please, 38. So here, I'd like to re-emphasize the role of public financial management. Like Mongolia, you have a health insurance system, but that does not mean that Mongolia healthcare system can run only by insurance. You still have a very important role of government tax money, government budget. So that's why public financial management still plays a key role in many countries' health financing system. And that's why coordination between government budget and health insurance contribution is so important. So public financial management, these are some important characteristics, desired characteristics we hope that public financial management system has in each country, like stability, stable health budgets with timely executions, because some countries, government increased budget, and next year there's a sharp decline in budget, little stability, and this consultative and transparent budget process. Usually budget is allocated by Ministry of Finance to the health sector, to line ministries. So what is the process of determining total health sector budget? Do you have a good communication, coordination between Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance when the Ministry of Finance determine the budget? And also a related issue is whether health budgets are well aligned with health sector priorities, on whether it's flexible in the structure and execution of health budgets. For example, like this COVID-19 pandemic, health sector needs a huge increase in public money, correct? To overcome this pandemic crisis. So that means that if you have a very flexible budget structure and flexible execution of budgets, then you can better cope with this COVID-19 pandemic crisis. And also, as I mentioned earlier, public financial management rules and procedures complies with strategic purchasing flexibly enough, because some countries, when I was a consultant in Oman, in Arabic region, the Ministry of Finance said, no, there's no exception in the public financial management. No single agency, public agency can have this fiscal autonomy. So they said no initially. They said no, public hospitals cannot have fiscal autonomy because of this very tight public financial management rules. So this alignment is another very important issue. Next page. So service delivery. I keep talking about this strategic purchasing is a tool to strengthen healthcare delivery, improve performance, discipline providers. We should not forget this, right? Because strategic purchasing is a very important function of financing that connects the financing and service delivery. Because people experience healthcare system. Even people experience health insurance through utilization of healthcare, right? So we should not forget that healthcare utilization, healthcare delivery is the key point that people experience health insurance system. And strategic purchasing is the key connector between financing function and service delivery and healthcare utilization. And purchasing, depending on the effectiveness of purchasing, service delivery can change. So first, primary care, we keep saying primary care is efficient as a gatekeeper. And, in some countries of Asia, if you have a very weak primary care system and health insurance is introduced, then people more bypass primary care. Because before health insurance, people want to go to hospitals, but they don't have money. But when health insurance is introduced, now they have a reduced financial barrier to hospitals, so they rush to hospitals. They bypass primary care, which is the case in some parts in Vietnam, some parts in India. So if you do not have a good quality primary care system, health insurance system may have some negative impact on the overall healthcare system. And remember, primary care is a very important frontline player in the pandemic crisis. And also, I mentioned that healthcare purchasing means the purchasing of continuum of care. And for the continuum of care, we need a good focal point, good gatekeeper, that is the primary care providers. Okay? So I think that I hope that in many countries around the world, health insurance is effectively supporting to strengthen the role of primary care. And also contracting with providers, we should pay attention to the quality of care. So HIGO should have the capacity to assess, review, and assess the quality of care of healthcare providers. And also HIGO should be able to assess the financial burden on patients. You should keep monitoring the financial burden on patients by monitoring provider behavior, because like this balance billing means that the providers are allowed to charge more than the health insurance fee. Okay, if hospitals charge more than the fee, then all financial burden will be on the shoulder of patients. Okay, so you should keep monitoring with the financial burden for consumers. Next page, please. This is about WHO report to access to essential services, but let me skip this part. So I also gave some more examples of my papers. If you're interested, you can have a look. So let me close my lecture here, and please, because I have to leave at 6 o'clock in Korean time. So please go ahead with your questions, because last week we have some limited time for questions. Any questions?